You're tearing me apart!
You're Tearing Me Apart. Rebel Without a Cause wasn't just another teen drama about switchblades and fast cars. It was a battleground where method acting collided with studio interference, where real gang members shaped Hollywood fiction, and where the pursuit of authenticity nearly destroyed everyone involved. The 1955 film looked like a simple story of teenage rebellion on the surface, but behind the cameras, chaos erupted daily. James Dean fought directors over creative control. Real switchblades drew actual blood. Gang members auditioned by literally starting street fights on the Warner Brothers backlot. And three of Hollywood's brightest young stars would all meet tragic early deaths, making this film their eternal monument. Today I'm revealing 20 weird facts about Rebel Without a Cause that will completely change how you see this legendary film. Plus, I've got one bonus fact so shocking that even hardcore James Dean fans have never heard it. Let's dive into the real rebellion. Dr. Seuss wrote the first draft. Before James Dean ever slicked back his hair or put on that iconic red jacket, the creator of The Cat in the Hat was crafting the rebellion. Theodore Seuss Geisel, better known today as Dr. Seuss, penned the original screenplay adaptation in the late 1940s. The studio had purchased rights to Dr. Robert Lindner's psychiatric case study about a real teenage criminal named Harold, and their first instinct was to hand it to the master of whimsical children's stories. Imagine Green Eggs and Ham meets juvenile delinquency. The script never saw production, but it existed. Somewhere in the Warner Brothers archives lies Dr. Seuss's vision of teenage angst, probably featuring rhyming couplets about switchblades and stolen cars. The film was based on a real teen criminal in federal prison. The story of the making of Rebel Without a Cause actually goes back nearly a decade before it arrived in theaters in 1955. To a book of the same name by Dr. Robert Lindner. Published in 1944, the book was a case study of a young man named Harold, who was then an inmate at the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. Harold wasn't your typical Hollywood delinquent. He was a real psychopath whose case file became the foundation for cinema's most famous rebel. Dr. Lindner studied Harold's criminal psychology for months, documenting his complete disconnection from authority and society. The irony cuts deep. Audiences fell in love with Jim Stark's vulnerability, but the character's DNA traced back to a genuine sociopath serving time for violent crimes. Marlon Brando almost played the lead role. 8 years before Dean made the character his own, Warner Brothers screen tested a young New York theater actor to play the rebel at the heart of the story, then envisioned as a much more psychopathic criminal than the disillusioned teen that Jim Stark ultimately became. That actor was Marlon Brando, fresh off his Broadway triumph in A Streetcar Named Desire. Picture Brando's raw intensity channeling teenage rebellion instead of Dean's wounded vulnerability. The screen test apparently went well, but the project stalled in development hell for years. By the time the cameras finally rolled, Brando had already claimed his own rebel territory in The Wild One. Hollywood's loss became cinema history's gain, but imagine the alternate universe where Stanley Kowalski's intensity defined teenage angst instead of James Dean's delicate fury. A real gang member became the film's secret consultant. Frank Mazzola, who played the gang member Crunch, was also a member of the Athenians, a gang that Mazzola himself referred to as a social club that was nonetheless very tough and territorial. When Mazzola started pointing out every phony element in the script, director Nicholas Ray didn't fire him, he promoted him. Ray asked him if he could provide an example of real gang life, and Mazzola knew just where to look. So what I did is I called an Athenian meeting, Mazzola recalled. The Athenians literally hassled Ray and Dean on the street to show them authentic gang behavior. It worked. Ray gave Mazzola an office and made him an unofficial script consultant, shaping everything from dialogue to Dean's Mercury to the choreography of knife fights. The supporting cast auditioned by starting a real street fight. Ray's obsession with authenticity reached dangerous extremes during casting. Eventually, once that number was whittled down to a few dozen, Ray pushed the authenticity even further and asked the actors to start a fight as if they were really in a gang. Picture 300 hopeful young actors gathered on the Warner Brothers backlot with their cars, then suddenly erupting into genuine violence for a movie role. So we fought, and some cars were smashed, some people were really hurt, and then Nick said cut, and that was that. Jack Grinnage, who played Moose, recalled the brutal twist. Grinnage later discovered there had never been any film in the camera. Ray had orchestrated real violence just to see who could handle the chaos. The actors who survived the brawl earned their spots in cinema history. James Dean broke his hand getting drunk for a scene. For the scene in which Jim drunkenly pounds on the desk in the police station, Dean apparently actually got drunk and then pounded the desk as hard as he could, breaking bones in his hand and leaving Ray forced to shoot around the bandages. This wasn't an accident. It was Dean's method acting taken to its logical extreme. He believed audiences could sense authentic emotion versus manufactured drama, so he literally broke himself for the camera. Ray had to completely restructure the shooting schedule around Dean's injury, wrapping bandages in ways that wouldn't show on film. The desk-pounding scene remains one of the film's most visceral moments, precisely because Dean's pain was genuine. He bled for his art, literally. The switchblade fight used real blades that actually cut Dean. The knife fight between Jim and Buzz wasn't choreographed with prop weapons. The switchblade fight between Jim and Buzz Corey Allen, which was done with real blades, though certain precautions were taken, Dean can be seen in production stills placing padding under his shirt. At one point, while shooting the fight, Allen reached out and actually cut Dean. When Ray called cut to check on his injured star, Dean exploded in fury. Jimmy gets furious and grabs Nick and says, "Don't ever say cut. Don't ever say cut to me. I'll say cut if something's wrong. Don't you ever cut the scene." Co-star Dennis Hopper later recalled and noted that Dean wanted to preserve the realism of his injury for the camera. Dean walked off set in rage and had to be coaxed back to finish the scene with real blood streaming down his arm. Natalie Wood got the role after being called a juvenile delinquent by police. Wood finally won the role after she was involved in a car crash that also included future Rebel Without a Cause co-star Dennis Hopper, with whom she was romantically involved. When she was in the police station after the crash, Wood called Ray to pick her up, and when he arrived, she informed him that one of the officers had referred to her as a juvenile delinquent. Ray had been hesitant to cast Wood because of her innocent child star image from Miracle on 34th Street. But when she looked him in the eye at that police station and asked, "Now do I get the part?" Ray realized she had the edge he needed. The former child star transformed herself into one of cinema's most complex teen characters, earning an Oscar nomination and proving that sometimes life's accidents create the perfect audition. Elizabeth Taylor's pregnancy freed up James Dean for the role. Dean almost missed his most iconic role because of a scheduling conflict with Giant. Then, a fortuitous development in the life of another of Giant's stars changed everything. Elizabeth Taylor was pregnant, which meant the film had to be delayed until June of 1955. That freed Dean up to take another iconic role, the one that would define his legend more than any other. Without Taylor's pregnancy, Dean would have been locked into George Stevens' epic Western, and someone else, possibly Tab Hunter, would have worn that red jacket. The timing was so tight that Dean barely finished Rebel before rushing back to Giant, where he would film his final scenes. Taylor's pregnancy didn't just delay one movie, it reshaped cinema history by freeing up the actor who would become the eternal symbol of teenage rebellion. The film had to be shot in color. Because of a legal technicality, Ray and Stern both believed that the film should be shot like a B movie, with a grittier style that was perfectly suited to black and white, and Ray even began production by shooting this way. The gritty black and white aesthetic would have perfectly matched the film's raw emotional content. But technology intervened. Rebel Without a Cause was also being shot in the widescreen format CinemaScope, though, and it turned out there was a clause in the CinemaScope licensing agreement, which said all CinemaScope films must also be color films. That contractual detail forced the switch that gave us Dean's iconic red jacket and the vibrant Technicolor palette. Sometimes the most crucial creative decisions aren't artistic choices, they're legal requirements that accidentally create movie magic. Hey, before we continue with more shocking facts about this legendary film, go ahead and like and subscribe because we're about to reveal how Dennis Hopper nearly fought the director over Natalie Wood. And trust me, you won't believe what happens next. Dennis Hopper almost fought the director over Natalie Wood. At the time she was cast in Rebel Without a Cause, Wood was romantically involved with Hopper, who was also set to co-star in the film. During the production, though, Wood also struck up an affair with Ray, and one day Hopper apparently discovered them together. The discovery shattered the young actor's world. Hopper, barely 19 and wildly in love, confronted the 44-year-old director and challenged him to a fistfight. Ray's preference was to simply fire Hopper and keep him away from the set. Warner Brothers wanted the young star to stick around, though, and so Ray settled for giving Hopper a smaller role with no lines. That's why Hopper plays the silent goon instead of having a major speaking part. Personal betrayal cost him screen time, but launched his lifelong reputation as Hollywood's wildest rebel. Dean dominated scenes so much that he essentially directed other actors. As production began, Dean's passion for method acting led Ray to give him an extremely large share of creative control over each scene, to the point that it was often Dean who would dictate that pace and tone of a scene to the other actors. The 24-year-old actor had studied under Lee Strasberg and took method acting to extremes that sometimes crossed into megalomania. Jimmy did most of the directing, he gave us our lines, he dominated the entire thing. Ann Doran, who played Jim's mother, later recalled. Dean would rewrite dialogue on the spot, change blocking, and demand take after take until he felt the emotional truth of each moment. Some co-stars found him insufferable. Others recognized genius in action. The camera captured Dean's intensity because he was genuinely intense, controlling, obsessive, and utterly committed to his craft. The famous red jacket was originally supposed to be blue. Dean's wardrobe became as iconic as his performance, but the color choice that defined a generation happened almost by accident. The original costume design called for a blue jacket, which would have created a completely different visual impact against the Technicolor backgrounds. When the wardrobe department realized the blue would clash with the CinemaScope color palette, they switched to red at the last minute. That crimson leather jacket became shorthand for teenage rebellion across decades, inspiring everyone from the Fonz to the Ramones. One color change transformed a costume piece into a cultural symbol that still resonates 70 years later. Sometimes the smallest production decisions create the biggest cultural moments. The chicken run scene nearly killed multiple stunt drivers. The film's most dangerous sequence wasn't the knife fight, it was the clifftop chickie run that claimed the life of Buzz's character. Ray insisted on filming the scene with real cars racing toward an actual cliff at the Palisades, using stunt drivers who had to time their jumps with split-second precision. Multiple takes were required because the first attempts either looked fake or were too dangerous to complete. The stunt drivers repeatedly careened toward certain death, bailing out at the last possible second while cars plummeted into the Pacific. What audiences saw as teenage bravado was actually professional daredevils risking their lives for a 3-minute sequence. The crashes were real, the danger was genuine, and the insurance companies went ballistic when they saw the dailies. Sal Mineo's character was written as an allegory for homosexual desire. Plato's Obsession with Jim Stark carried coded meanings that 1950s audiences weren't supposed to recognize, but director Nicholas Ray embedded them deliberately. Mineo's character represented the era's hidden gay youth, desperately seeking connection but forced to express desire through violence and hero worship. Ray and screenwriter Stuart Stern crafted Plato's devotion to Jim as a subtle exploration of forbidden attraction, using the language of friendship to tell a love story that couldn't be spoken aloud. Mineo himself was gay, though deeply closeted, and brought authentic emotional pain to the role. The performance resonates decades later precisely because it captured real longing disguised as loyalty. Cinema's first coded gay teenager hid in plain sight, breaking hearts while breaking barriers. Nicholas Ray and James Dean got high together during rehearsals. Ray worked hard to get to know his young lead, hanging out with Dean in New York, getting drunk and smoking pot together, and then ultimately holding lengthy rehearsal sessions at Ray's Chateau Marmont bungalow. The director-actor relationship transcended professional boundaries and became something closer to a father-son bond, complete with shared vices and emotional breakdowns. Ray saw himself in Dean's rebellious energy, while Dean craved the paternal approval Ray provided. Their marijuana sessions weren't just recreational, they were intensive character development workshops where boundaries dissolved and authentic emotions surfaced. The chemistry on screen reflected genuine intimacy off screen, but the relationship also enabled Dean's most destructive impulses. Their bond created movie magic and personal chaos in equal measure. The film was banned in multiple countries and had to be smuggled into Spain. Rebel was also banned in Spain, where it had to be smuggled into the country for private screenings and was not officially released there until 1964. Censors worldwide recognized the film's explosive potential to inspire actual teenage rebellion. The movie's frank portrayal of parental failure and youth violence terrified authorities across multiple continents. In Spain, underground networks developed to distribute bootleg prints, turning cinema into contraband. Theater owners risked imprisonment to screen the film privately, understanding that audiences hungered for stories that acknowledged teenage pain. The ban lasted 9 years, making Rebel Without a Cause an underground cultural force before it ever became officially available. Sometimes, censorship creates the very rebellion it seeks to prevent. Dean's death made the film a morbid tourist attraction. On September 30th, Dean tragically died in a car crash at the age of 24, less than a month before Rebel Without a Cause arrived in theaters. The timing transformed a teen drama into a supernatural experience. Audiences flocked to theaters not just to see a movie, but to commune with a ghost. Dean's death elevated every scene into prophecy, every line into epitaph. The film became a morbid pilgrimage site where teenage fans could worship their martyred saint. Warner Brothers faced an ethical nightmare. Should they capitalize on tragedy or show restraint? They chose capitalism, plastering Dean's image across promotional materials with the tagline, "The star who lived fast and died young." The box office exploded, but so did the mythology that would consume Dean's legacy forever. All 3 lead actors died young and tragically. Sadly, Dean was not the only member of the film's cast to suffer a tragic early death. On February 12, 1976, Sal Mineo was murdered outside his Los Angeles apartment at the age of 37, and Natalie Wood famously and mysteriously drowned in the waters off Santa Catalina Island on November 29th, 1981, at the age of 43. The three young stars who embodied eternal youth never reached old age themselves. Dean's car crash, Mineo's brutal stabbing by a random stranger, Wood's mysterious drowning, each death seemed to echo the film's themes of youth cut short by cruel fate. The curse of Rebel Without a Cause became Hollywood legend, as if the film's exploration of teenage mortality had somehow infected its stars with actual doom. Their deaths transformed the movie from entertainment into monument, preserving their youth forever in celluloid amber. The Griffith Observatory became a pilgrimage site for teenage rebels. The planetarium scenes weren't just atmospheric, they created a sacred space for generations of alienated youth. After the film's release, Griffith Observatory became an unofficial shrine where teenagers would gather to recreate scenes, leave flowers for Dean, and find solace in shared rebellion. The observatory's cosmic backdrop perfectly symbolized the film's themes of cosmic insignificance and individual importance. Young people would drive up the winding roads at midnight, park where Dean had parked, and stare at the same stars that had witnessed his character's awakening. The building became more than a filming location. It transformed into a cathedral for the lost and searching, a place where Dean's spirit seemed to linger in the California night air. Bonus fact: the most shocking secret about Rebel Without a Cause? The film's production was so chaotic that Warner Brothers seriously considered canceling it multiple times during shooting. Executive Jack Warner received daily reports of injuries, fights, and Dean's increasingly erratic behavior, leading to heated boardroom discussions about cutting their losses. The studio had already invested heavily in the CinemaScope color production, but Dean's method acting was literally bleeding money as medical costs mounted and insurance premiums skyrocketed. The breaking point came when Dean walked off set after the Switchblade incident, disappearing for 3 days while the entire production shut down. Only a desperate phone call from Nicholas Ray, promising to control his star, saved the film from being permanently shelved. Without that conversation, movie history's most iconic rebel would have died on the cutting room floor instead of on a California highway. Rebel Without a Cause began as a clinical case study of a teenage psychopath and transformed into cinema's most enduring portrait of adolescent pain. The film that was almost written by Dr. Seuss, almost starred Marlon Brando, and almost never existed at all became the defining statement of a generation that felt misunderstood by the world their parents had built. What audiences thought they were watching was a simple story of teenage rebellion. What they were actually witnessing was the collision of Hollywood's old studio system with a new generation of actors who refused to play by the rules. Dean didn't just act rebellious, he lived it, bled it, and ultimately died for it. If this video opened your eyes to the chaos behind one of cinema's most beloved films, smash that like button and hit subscribe for more shocking secrets from Hollywood's golden age. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous rebels are the ones making the movies, not just starring in them.